Light the fires. The great hunt begins.
Sequels are tricky things in general. Sequels of games that were considered amazing and based on characters with a huge fan base are even trickier. How do you do interesting things with these characters without disappointing fans? How do you improve the story or gameplay of a game that is well loved without taking away or adding things that people don't like? Sequels also tend to go for more, so how do you juggle what you add to the game without muddying things too much? All of these are challenges that face Spider-Man 2. Coming off of two successful games, all based on the well-loved wall crawlers, makes expectations and hype out of this world. So how did Spider-Man 2 do with these challenges? Was it able to rise to meet them, or did it stumble on the way? Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is an open-world action-adventure game developed by Insomniac Games. It released in 2023 for the PlayStation 5 and is $69.99 for the standard version of the game. There is also a deluxe version that is $79.99 if you want some extras, like extra suits for both Spider-Man. Like previous entries in the series, it has a T rating, and to be honest, this one is probably the one that deserves it the most, as it goes a bit darker than the previous games. My feelings about the story of Spider-Man 2 are a bit of a tangled mess. Out of all the parts of the game, this is where I have the most mixed feelings. So let's try to untangle things a bit at a time. I'll give a general overview of the story, and then I'll present what I liked and didn't like about the story. The story picks up after the events of the first two games in the series. It follows the general feel of the first game, a major villain for the first half and a different major villain for the second half of the game. For the first half, it is Kraven hunting the most dangerous game, which in this case isn't just humans, but supervillains. For the second half, it is symbiote time, with Venom taking center stage. Over the course of the game, you will run into other villains both as part of the main story or in side quests throughout the game. With more characters, the story isn't as great at showing both sides to our main characters. It tries, as we see Peter's struggles with jobs, maintaining his relationship with MJ, and his involvement with the Emily May Foundation, a new scientific initiative started with Harry Osborn. Miles has his own life issues as well, as he goes to school, is trying to fill out his application for college, and finding time for family and friends, while also dealing with the loss he feels with the death of his father. There's an attempt made here to get those both sides really worked on, but I just didn't find it as strong as in the first game. There are two things that the story and side missions did accomplish really well, though, in my opinion. The first is that it did a great job at showing the dual nature of Spider-Man. The friendly neighborhood Spider-Man who isn't just about fighting crime, but about helping people even in these small, seemingly boring ways. I get that not everyone is a big fan of these side quests that kind of focus on that, but for me, they highlight a big part of who Spider-Man is. The other side of this, of course, shows off Spider-Man as a superhero facing off against supervillains and fighting crime. But I feel like that's often the much easier thing to pull off in games like this. I personally really like the way that both sides of the Spider-Man were presented in meaningful ways, even if the superhero side gets the most spotlight, as you would kind of expect. The second was that it felt like the story was trying to create a cohesive world. Running into the other Spider-Man or some other ally while taking out a crime was a really awesome feeling and gave the sense of a lived-in world. This is also why the story parts that have you playing as MJ don't really bother me. While it is a Spider-Man game, it is about developing the world of Spider-Man and his allies, not just on one singular hero. This is hard to do, and I don't think Insomniac pulls it off perfectly, but I did like it when it worked. I would say that this story of Spider-Man 2 is good, and maybe even great in places. It is grand in scope and creates some awesome action scenes, while also offering you the more quote-unquote boring aspects of Spider-Man. Even so, it never quite reached the level of enjoyment that I had for the story of the first game. There are a few reasons for this, so let's go through them as much as I can without revealing spoilers for this game, but I will probably have spoilers from previous games in the series here, so be warned. The first thing is that I never quite felt as emotionally invested as I did in the first game. The realization of Martin Lee as a villain, the death of Miles' father, Octavius' slow descent into villainy, watching Spider-Man getting beaten and almost killed by Octavius, and the death of Aunt May were all woven in the narrative in a very satisfying way. Part of this reason is that Spider-Man 2 is more self-reflective. A lot of it is about the inner turmoil of many of our characters. Peter is trying and failing to balance normal life and being Spider-Man while also dealing with the loss of May. Miles is trying to get over the hatred he feels for Martin Lee killing his father, and even MJ is hitting a crossroads in her career while also trying to be there for Peter. This isn't a bad direction to go, but trying to go introspective with multiple characters while having a couple of big baddies in the mix made it harder to build up the emotional payoff in the same way that the first game did. You just couldn't go to the same depth, at least not with the length the game was going for. Even with the more emotional moments of the game, it felt like kind of repeating some of the same events of the first game again to kind of try to get those same feelings back, but there just wasn't the build up there to really make those moments work to the same degree. They would still be powerful, but not as powerful as some of the things in the first game. Second, I'm not fully vibing with the path they have Peter's Spider-Man going. He's been almost dead or knocked out so many times within this series that it almost makes him feel too weak. The part in the first game when this happens seems legit. He's worn down due to getting beaten badly by 6 villains during the raft escape, then goes and takes most of them down, but then is decimated by Dr. Octopus, in part because he's more interested in keeping the cure to Devil's Breath safe than engaging in battle. But since then, he's just seemed quite a bit weaker. It makes it kind of hard to believe that he was a solo Spider-Man for so many years before Miles came around. The first game does talk about how he would get injured and MJ would have to help him and be Nurse MJ, but it didn't seem quite as severe as some of these situations. It's just weird since Peter has suit upgrades, more experience, and then even some extra powers in the course of the story, but still gets his butt handed to him quite often in the cutscenes. It's also strange since Miles seems to get through things fairly unscathed. Sure, he gets kidnapped again like he did in Spider-Man Miles Morales, not just once, but twice, but he comes through things fairly well overall. Now, this is nothing against Miles. I really like the character. I'm even fairly comfortable with where they leave things at the end of the game with him. But at the same time, there just seems to be this thread in the narrative of him being a better Spider-Man that I'm not fully on board with. Now, maybe this is just due to Peter kind of in his self-depreciating view of himself and kind of some of the Parker moping that MJ has talked about in previous games, but I'm not fully sure that it's all coming from Peter. It kind of seems to be a thread that the game had, even in Miles' spin-off game. My third and final issue was that some of the aspects of the narrative just felt a little disjointed. There would be something that happened and it would either never really be referenced or just accepted with little or absolutely no explanation at all. I'll give one example from the first half of the game. There is a point when Kraven is trying to release Scorpion in order to abduct him for his hunt. In the course of the action, Miles is poisoned by Scorpion and goes into a dream-like experience. It's not quite as trippy as Peter's in the first game, but it's still in that kind of vein. Then all of a sudden, Miles just snaps out of it, the wound disappears, and nobody ever really mentions it again. Now, this is just weird because you have Peter almost dying from it in the first game, and yet Miles is perfectly fine without any kind of action happening to take care of it. There are certainly possibilities as to why this happened. Did Miles gain poison resistance as part of his spider powers? Was the poison in Scorpion's tail just residue, or had it weakened due to time? It's kind of unclear how his poison works with his suit and how much the prison was able to do with the poison in his tail while he's in custody. However, no mention or explanation is really given for this. It's just kind of dropped. You don't even see the wound where he got sliced in his costume in future cutscenes in that area. It's just dropped and you're just supposed to kind of move on from it. And it's stuff like this that just didn't really make a lot of sense. And there were quite a few times that something like this happened over the course of the narrative. Now, with all these things, the story just didn't hit the same way the first game did. Even when not comparing it to the first game, I just felt that there were too many sections that just felt a bit bumpy and didn't really make complete sense, even for a story based in comics and superheroes. Now, while I did find the story a bit disappointing compared to the first game, the gameplay is an element that I found very much improved across the board. There were maybe a few minor things that I didn't like the addition of or removal of, but overall I would say that this was the best gameplay of the series so far, which is impressive because it was already excellent in so many ways before this. The basics of the gameplay transfer over pretty much from the earlier games in the series. Both traversal and combat will feel very familiar to anyone who has played either of the previous games in the series. Both aspects of gameplay, though, have received one notable addition. For traversal, in addition to swinging around New York on your webs, you also have web wings that allow you to glide. This addition gives you a fun new way to traverse New York, and there will be missions that require you to use your gliding abilities. Gliding is a much quicker way to zip around the city, especially since there are also wind tunnels in the city that allow you to pick up a breeze and travel very fast while you're in it. In terms of combat, the new addition here is parrying. This addition I didn't love quite as much. After playing the last two Spider-Man games fairly recently, my reflex is to dodge, and so the addition of an alternate defensive move wasn't something that felt too natural. There are certain attacks that can't be dodged and have to be parried, but many times in the heat of battle, I wasn't able to pick up on the parry attack tell all the time. While I didn't hate this addition, I didn't feel like it added nearly as much to the combat as the web wings did to traversal. In addition to basic combat, you have two additional means to control and damage enemies. These are abilities and gadgets. While gadgets aren't new, and Spider-Man Miles Morales kind of had abilities, Spider-Man 2 streamlines these systems and makes a very satisfying way of using them. Gadgets are more similar to the way they were in Miles Morales. You only have 4 of them, 5 counting the basic web shooter, and they are used by pressing a combination of R1 and one of the face buttons, while the regular web shooter is just done by pressing R1 by itself. There are some fun gadgets here, and while they maybe aren't quite as good as some of the ones from the first Spider-Man, I did find them more enjoyable than the Miles Morales gadgets. The big improvement comes with the addition of abilities. Abilities have kind of been around in the previous games. Spider-Man had suit abilities that could be equipped and used to give some sort of benefit. Miles Morales incorporated his Venom abilities more into his basic moveset and the use of the Venom bar. Spider-Man 2's system is much better. It's basically a mirror of the gadget system. As you unlock abilities, you'll be able to use them with the L1 and a face button on the controller. That means you get 4 abilities to use and the 4 gadgets that are able to be used in a very smooth manner as you're facing up against enemies. Gadgets regenerate like they have in the previous games. There is a chance to get one back when taking out an enemy. Abilities have a cooldown, and you have to wait until that cooldown is done to be able to use the ability again. Miles does also have his camouflage ability that remains a separate thing from the others. To add to the fun of these abilities, they can also be customized a little bit. Peter starts out with Iron Spider type arms added to his suit that give him special abilities that he can use. These can later be traded out for symbiote powers. Miles has his Venom powers from his game, but then is also able to unlock evolved Venom powers over the course of the game. Each ability slot will have a power in both of these categories, so you can mix and match your favorite powers together depending on what abilities you like best for each of the Spider-Man. So you could have 2 abilities being like evolved Venom, and then 2 abilities being just the regular Venom for Miles Morales, or 1 Iron Spider arms ability for Peter, and then 3 symbiote powers. Like, those are the kind of things that you can do. Pick which ones you like and go into battle. Similar to previous entries in the series, there are a number of progression systems in the game. Leveling up will allow you to gain skill points and unlock new skills in the various skill trees of the game. The game has a skill tree for Miles, Peter, and a shared skill tree that will benefit both Spider-Men when leveled up. I really enjoyed the way they organized this, as it felt like a good mix of general upgrades and character-specific upgrades. In addition to the leveling up system, the token system of the previous games return. Spider-Man 2 finds a nice middle point between the first Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales. Instead of the 6 types of tokens like in the first game, or just the 2 that were found in Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2 has 4 different types of tokens. Tech parts are by far the most common of the bunch. You'll find this in pretty much any activity that you do. You'll have a ton of these. I think by the end of the game, I had over 6,000 of these tokens left over after unlocking everything. The rarer tokens are rare tech parts, city tokens, and hero tokens. These are found by doing specific tasks. You can also find rare tech parts in golden stashes around the city. These tokens allow for 3 different types of upgrades. You can upgrade your gadgets, which will increase their power and the number of times that you can use them. You will also be able to upgrade your suit tech with tokens as well. This will help increase your health, damage, focus, or traversal abilities. The last form of upgrade is just cosmetic, as tokens again allow you to unlock certain suits and the variant colors of the suits. Not all suits are unlocked this way. Some are simply unlocked by accomplishing various story missions or side quests. Overall, I really love the sense of progression in the game. I think it felt better than any of the previous games. I was able to get everything unlocked in one playthrough, and it never felt like too much of a grind for me, or none of the quests were really too frustrating. Granted, this will depend on how much you enjoy all of the side quests and content of the game. And there are lots of different types of side quests and things to do. Before I get into those though, Spider-Man 2 does a very interesting thing in regards to district progression in this game. Basically, everything that you accomplish in the district adds to a progression bar. There are no set amount of crimes you have to do in a district like in the first game. But if you take out a crime in the financial district, for example, you will then gain progress on the bar, which allows for various unlocks, including some of the rarer tokens. One of the most significant unlocks is the ability to fast travel, which is probably one of the most impressive fast travels I've ever seen in a game. You pick where you want to go in that district, hold the fast travel button, and you will just appear there with very little loading. It's amazing. As much as I love the traversal in the game, fast travel was just so good to use when you had to go clear across the map or just wanted to get somewhere really quick. In addition to crimes, there are many things to do in New York. It's a good mix of more mundane quests, action-oriented quests, and collectibles. These range from friendly neighborhood Spider-Man quests that involve trying to find someone's grandfather, to taking out hunter bases or symbiote nests, to finding spider bots scattered throughout the city. Some of these side quests also contain little mini-games like the spectrograph and circuit puzzles of the first game. I like the variety in gameplay in these sections, but others may not so much. If I had any complaints, they are all fairly minor, like the weird choice to have us play as Haley, Miles' love interest, in one of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man quests. It wasn't bad, but it felt out of place, or like a cool way to have players experience what it would be like to have limited hearing. The Brooklyn Visions quests also seemed strange in this way, like they weren't really things that Spider-Man would have been called for or would have had to help out with. Also, the spider bots were kind of a pain to find, as they don't show up on your main map. You can unlock a traversal suit tech upgrade that allows them to show up on the minimap. It's the one that allows you to see stashes, but it was probably the most tedious side content of the game for me. I loved the gameplay of Spider-Man 2. It's probably the best of the series so far. However, that's not to say that there weren't some odd absences in the game. They took out the crimes part of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man app, which I kind of missed. I think having a random selection of crimes to pick from every so often would have been a nice addition, especially near the end when all I get are symbiote crimes and need to get some webline takedowns. So it would have been nice to be able to pick like, oh, this one I can just choose and do. There is also no New Game Plus, no ability to replay missions, no ability to replay podcasts, no character bios, none of those kind of things. And these were all nice touches to earlier games that seemed like odd removals. For podcasts, what I really want is the ability to play them in the menu and go back to the game or other menus and have them continue playing. I didn't tend to use them that much in previous games because I wanted that feature, not the ability to replay them removed entirely. And none of these are huge things by any means, but since they were in either one or both of the previous games, it's an odd choice to have them missing here. I think New Game Plus is being added later, but still, it's weird to not have it out now if you were going to add it and wanted it in the game. One last thing I want to note about the gameplay is that the MJ stealth sections do return, at least kind of. They're different than the first game because being found once doesn't cause a game over. MJ can get hit a couple times before going down. She's also a much bigger force to be reckoned with here, as she still has her trusty stun gun from the first game. This also gets a number of upgrades over the course of the game, and I actually found her fun to play as. Sure, you're not playing as Spider-Man, but MJ is integral to Spider-Man, and having her being an active part of the game is something that I can definitely get behind. There are other people we played as in the game that made less sense to me than playing as MJ. As I said, the gameplay here was a lot of fun for me. While the story of Spider-Man 2 was not as good as the first game, the gameplay is significantly improved. I'm not always the biggest fan of open world games, but the Spider-Man games have always been fun to play through, and I felt that Spider-Man 2 got rid of a lot of the more tedious elements that the first game had with its open world. Spider-Man 2's New York is going to look very familiar in many ways to those who have played the other entries in the series. The Spider-Man games have always looked great, and Spider-Man 2 makes it look even better. While the style is similar, the level of detail, lighting, and scope have all improved significantly. This is the first Spider-Man game that has been made just for the PlayStation 5, and it definitely shows. I have always liked the stylistic direction of Spider-Man, and this game is no different. The look of the suits, the characters, and the environments are all really well done. It's pretty amazing just how realistic games are able to look these days. Sound is also good. Much like the first game, the soundtrack is more of a background presence than being used in an obvious way to mirror the events going on. I like the Spider-Man theme used for the series, and the music is good. It's just that more background feel, and I'm just not always super fond of that way of using it. I tend to like a little bit more of a higher presence of music in my games, but it's not that it's bad in Spider-Man. I just maybe would have liked it to be used even more. Now, where I think the game really shines in terms of sound is in the voice acting. They've got a talented cast of voice actors here, and they do a great job with the dialogue. I don't really know that the sound was better or worse than the previous games, but more about what I would expect from the game. Also, the time that was probably the most unique in terms of sound design was when you were playing without very much sound at all as Haley. While playing as her did feel a bit odd from a plot perspective, it was a pretty interesting experience to go through from a sound perspective. So I did want to make a mention of that here. There seems to be two experiences with Marvel's Spider-Man 2. You either have a lot of errors and bugs, or you have a pretty smooth experience. My personal experience was more toward the second. I did run into some issues, but nothing super major. I think the worst was when I was battling one of the hunter bases. One of the hunters wound up like stuck underground or in a wall or something, and I couldn't get to him by any way, so I had to restart the mission. It was maybe a little annoying, but with little loading time and the ability to restart from recent checkpoint, I was always able to get things sorted when things like this happen. To be honest, the most persistent issue and the one that kind of got the most annoying for me over the course of the game was the difficulty in getting the use prompt to pop up sometimes. Getting that triangle simply to show in order to open caches or look at items would sometimes be super frustrating to get right. Even then, I was typically able to get things to work. They just took way longer than I would have liked sometimes. Overall, I did experience some issues, and it is always best if you don't have that happen. However, open world games are notoriously complex and often full of various kinds of bugs. To me, Spider-Man 2 was fairly stable, and I know Insomniac has been working on putting out fixes for some of the bugs that people may have experienced. While I would always love to have an experience without any bugs, I also never ran into anything that made the game too frustrating or unplayable for me. Spider-Man 2 is an amazing game, and one that I've very much enjoyed my 30 hours playing. It takes you through an engaging story and has the best gameplay of the series so far, in my opinion. That said, the story also felt like it was a bit uneven and maybe stretched a bit too thin, trying to focus and develop two main characters and a supporting cast of heroes and villains. It's still a very good story, but I just thought that it didn't reach the heights of the first game. What's hard is to figure out how to balance things all out. While the story of Spider-Man 2 was not as strong as the first games in my opinion, I did think that the gameplay and graphics were better than the first, even with some strange omissions to the gameplay. I also experienced a few more issues while playing this than I did the first Spider-Man. Although, admittedly, my first experience with it was just this year, and was probably after many patches that led to increased stability. So taking all of these factors into account, I'm giving Spider-Man 2 a 9 out of 10. Personally, I think the dip in story is more important to me and a bit greater than the improvement to gameplay. That still means that I think that Spider-Man 2 is a great game. If the story just had a bit more polish, it would have been right up there with the first game in my rankings. I just found too many places where things didn't fully make sense, or just went in directions that I didn't like, or felt just kind of unnecessarily drawn out. Even though this may have been a bit disappointing to me, I am still a big fan of the Insomniac Spider-Man games. I may not have loved the story quite as much as the original, but it's still a great story and was a lot of fun to go through. And playing as Spider-Man has never felt better. Again, one of the important things for games like this is, do you feel like Spider-Man? And you very much do throughout the game. So I am very much looking forward to seeing where they go next with the series, whether it's with DLC, another Miles spinoff, or for Spider-Man 3 down the line. Wherever that path goes, I will definitely be there to see where the series goes to from here.
This will be a new record. And they said it couldn't be done.